I have stress and probably a little bit of anxiety on top of it. I'm antsy and I really just think it's how I'm wired. I wish I could change it, but I can't. So I always feel like I'm falling a little bit short and that I'm not living up to my potential. And I kind of perseverate on that a little bit. And again, that's who I am. Now, people who know me would probably think that I'm a pretty chill guy, that I seem like everything's easygoing. Now, people who know me think that I'm a pretty chill guy, seem pretty stress free and carefree in a sense. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get into. So, if you've ever felt the pressure of stress, like the true physical sense of pressure of stress, then this episode is for you. If for some reason you're an alien and you've never felt stress before, then please listen to this just so you can help those people around you that do feel stress and feel that very uncomfortable feeling of stress and anxiety. My name is Aaron Shaw, and I'm your podcast host. And my goal is to improve the health span of 1 million people. Now, that's pretty stressful just thinking about that. Health span is the length of time within our lifespan that we are healthy, active, and vibrant. And I am on a mission to take my nearly 30-year career as an occupational therapist, as a strength and conditioning specialist, as a coach, and as a competitive athlete to take all of my experience, the things that I've learned in the past, the things that I've learned firsthand, the things that I continue to learn, and share them with anybody who's willing to listen. And as the intro sort of spells out, we talk about everything from nutrition to exercise, healthy habits, and stress, which we're going to talk about today. I want to tell you about a time back in 2019. It is about 2 o'clock in the morning. I've been awake all night long, can't sleep. My chest hurts. I'm sweating. I am shaking. I have heart palpitations or fluttering, which I've never felt before. Literally, I feel like my heart is just sort of shaking in my rib cage, and definitely an elevated heart rate. And all of these symptoms are pretty consistent with really like a panic attack or anxiety. And it lasted, kind of ramped up and lasted for 10 or 15 minutes to the point where I had to sit up on the side of the bed and just almost catch my breath, which was crazy. I mean, being an endurance athlete, I'm very accustomed to being, out of breath. But no, when I've been lying in bed trying to sleep for hours, but my body was going through a very, very real response to stress. It's even a little stressful just to even think back to that situation. But I am naturally a bit anxious. I am unsettled. I am, of all things, I'm an entrepreneur, and nothing like having somebody who's a little bit stressed take on a whole bunch of responsibilities that are really self-inflicted challenges, which are great. But I recognize full well that there are health consequences to not controlling stress. Specifically, back in 2019, I had leveraged a whole bunch of things for my private practice that I had started, was expanding into a new space, purchased a new space for my practice, expanded into from one location to two locations, and did all this within the course of a couple of weeks. And I'll spare all the details, but the house of cards was coming down pretty quickly, and I knew that I had made some big mistakes and a whole bunch of lessons to learn, which again is for another episode on business. I could talk a lot about all the things that I did wrong at that point. But needless to say, I was under a tremendous amount of stress and my body was responding accordingly. And so that situation weighed heavily on me. And really, that situation and that night is really a before and after, like almost like my life before then and my life since then is different because of that night, because of the intensity of that emotional response, the physiological response that I went through that night. My life is different today because of that. In this episode, we're going to talk about three things. One is we're going to talk about how stress impacts our health span, our life. We're going to talk about briefly a little bit of the science behind it, like why all those symptoms that I just mentioned, all those sensations that I just mentioned are normal in a stressful situation. We're going to talk about the risks of having that stress for a prolonged period of time. The second thing we're going to talk about is tools. I'm going to give you 3 tools that you can use to decrease your stress, to manage your stress. I mean, the reality is I can't fix the way the way I'm wired necessarily. I can't fix, make this stress go away for me. It's managing it. So I'm going to give you 3 tools. There are many, many out there, but I'm going to give you 3. Really, I'm going to give you the top 3 that work for me, and hopefully they work for you. And the third thing we're going to do is talk about the one thing you can do today to extend your health span. And a part of that is going to be by reducing your stress, controlling your stress, and not dealing with the negative consequences of chronic stress. So, how does stress affect our health span? What really happens when we feel stress? What is it? What does that really mean? And when I was doing research for this, the first place I went was the American Psychological Association. Kudos, thumbs up on their website. Tons of great information out there. And I think it's worth defining or differentiating the difference between stress and anxiety. So, stress is typically caused by an external trigger, like biting off more than I can chew in my business, for example. And it is short term, and things that can trigger the short term stress would be stresses at work, an illness, having a disagreement with a loved one. It would be, spreading yourself too thin, needing to be 2 or 3 places at one time, trying to rush from point A to point B can be stressful. When you feel stress, and especially when it's under, more chronic stress, the physical sensations of what happens or the way it may show itself is being irritable, feeling fatigued, feeling angry, and sometimes like even being able to recognize that I'm have a short fuse. Like I have the sense like I want to snap and be cranky and pissed off at things out of proportion to what's really going on around me. It could be muscle pain, muscle fatigue, physical fatigue, just feeling exhausted all over, sleeping problems, digestive troubles. All of those things are a normal response to stress. So that's stress. Anxiety is different because those same symptoms, those same sensations linger even when a stressful situation is removed. So even when there's not that real stimulus to be stressed out about, you haven't had a disagreement. You don't need to be 3 places at once. You don't have a deadline looming over you in the next couple of hours. Yet, even without any sort of pressures like that, your body is behaving as if there is a real stress. There is a real reason to be amped up. That's the difference between stress and anxiety. The good news is that both stress and anxiety respond, or at least mild stress and anxiety, respond to the same interventions to help reduce it. So, what causes our body to make these changes, to give us these sensations? Well, it comes down to our nervous system. The system, it's called the autonomic nervous system. And specifically, this one branch of this autonomic nervous system is called the sympathetic nervous system. And it is you may have heard, the fight or flight nervous system. So it's this natural, really reflexive part of our nervous system that flips on a switch and a whole bunch of things happen. This is when the saber-toothed tiger you see him around the bend and you're like, man, your body says, we don't have to assess the situation very much. We have to get out now. So what happens? First thing, your body releases a bunch of blood sugar. Sugar goes to your muscles. Your muscles have now fuel to run or fuel to fight. If you're into fighting a saber-toothed tiger, more power to you. And it's okay. So you need that. The next thing it will do is increase blood clotting factor. What that means is your blood is more likely to clot. That is good, just in case as you're fighting the saber-toothed tiger, you get a scratch, your body's going to try to clot that up as soon as possible. That's great. But we do know that increased blood sugar, that's related to diabetes. Blood clots, well, if you need it because you're, wrestling a saber-toothed tiger, totally appropriate. But blood clots also stroke. So there's a problem if that's a chronic problem. Your body will pump out adrenaline and the hormone cortisol. And so adrenaline, increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, rapid breathing, heightened sense of alertness, all things in the heat of the moment, fight or flight, totally appropriate. Cortisol does a lot of things, but it will actually weaken your immune system ultimately, which makes us more likely to get sick. And the other thing with cortisol is that during chronic stress, so stress over a long period of time, you could almost think like when you are finishing up a semester at school, for example, and if you have this chronic stress, you got projects due, you got finals coming up or whatnot, or a big looming project and deadline, it can lead to cravings for fat and sugar. Bummer, right? There's also research that shows with high cortisol combined with high sugar consumption, it may actually prompt your body to deposit fat around your internal organs. So this is called visceral fat. And unfortunately, that is associated with cardiovascular disease. So literally being stressed, holding on to that stress, releases cortisol. Cortisol is going to make you crave sugar. So you start eating a little bit more sugar than you would otherwise. And that sugar in that situation is more likely to lead to fat around your organs. I know it's sort of a long cascade of things that happen, but all the more reason that we need to just keep our stress in check. So there's even a longer list than that, but the snapshot is stress feels terrible. None of us like it. It doesn't feel good. By definition, stress is not good. Everything, the last thing if you know anybody that says, I'm stressed out, you're not going to say, oh, that's awesome. Congratulations. No, man, like, oh man, you're stressed out. That's not good. What's going on? So it doesn't feel good. But there are times when being stressed is appropriate. Feeling stress is appropriate. And there's a benefit to that. And not just the saber-toothed tiger example. For example, giving a speech, talking on a podcast, for example. When you are taking a test, a little bit of stress at the right time gives you a heightened sense of awareness, help you focus for a period of time. And in certain situations, again, both from running from a saber-toothed tiger, for sure, you want to have some focus and mental clarity on what to do for decision making right there. But if you're taking a test, yeah, it's also going to come in handy. So that's okay. If you are going to compete, as another example, if there's an intense physical thing that's about to happen, I've raced hundreds of times, raced my bicycle, road bike and mountain bike hundreds of times. And to this day, for as much as I want to say, there are some events that I'll start and think, I don't care. I'm not going to worry about this. It is what it is. My body says otherwise. My body says there's an event, there's a competition, something's going to happen. And I could be standing there waiting for the race to start for 10 minutes and my heart rate is ramped up. Stress system is turned on. The sympathetic nervous system is turned on. In that moment, that is an appropriate response for that situation. So it's okay. That's fine. And, if you truly need to run from danger in this modern world, where there are no saber-toothed tigers, yeah, you want that fight or flight response. It's perfectly fine. Now, when it's not so good is when it is intense and when it is chronic, because there are health consequences, as we've just discussed. So let's move on to 3 tools you can use to help reduce your stress, to manage your stress. With the understanding, stress is normal. Stress has value to us at times. It should not be intense. It should not be chronic. And that's what we're going to talk about. 3 things. The first tool, the first skill, is probably the hardest one for me to talk about and describe. It is your mental perspective, literally like how we perceive the situation. And I would say a lot of the situations that can lead to stress, that'll turn on our sympathetic nervous system, is how we choose to perceive a situation. And I think you can look at maybe other people. It's maybe easier to see in other people than in ourselves. But you can see other people who are maybe getting a little bit too ramped up about the situation. There's no need to freak out so much when you get the wrong order at a restaurant. That person's freaking out for no reason. Just chill out. Or somebody, you didn't go through a green light or yellow light fast enough, and somebody behind you is like honking on the horn, driving, or like just losing their mind that you didn't go fast enough or get out of the way. You may think, man, that person needs to like calm down just a little bit. True. But we need to turn that mirror on ourselves and say, are there situations that we can change our perspective of a situation and maybe quiet our stress response? Maybe keep it in check so it's not quite as intense, perhaps. To go back to my story, when I was in this panic attack sort of situation at night, I very clearly remember the next day having a conversation with my wife about what I went through, about last night, about that night. And I just reiterated all the things that were going on, I was feeling, how I was feeling about my super stressed out evening that night. And we had a long conversation about the situation. As tough as it was, there were risks, but ultimately it came down to like nothing was as risky as me having a stroke or a heart attack. And no matter how bad it was, we were going to get through it. We were going to move on. And life would continue. Sun would come up the next day. We'll figure it out. We were going to figure it out. And from that moment on, I mean, it's literally in my life, like there's a before and after that event, that 24 or 48-hour period, that the situation I was in did not change. But in a sense, I chose not to be so stressed out about it. I said, I just can't do it anymore. I cannot walk around with this level of stress. And I mean, I hate to say like it was going to kill me, but it certainly wasn't going to make me very well. And I chose to look at that situation differently. My perspective changed. And so perspective is, I want to say perspective is everything, but certainly perspective is a whole heck of a lot. So think about a situation you may be in, or you were in, previously, that you were pretty stressed out about. And I always assess stressful situations, as in one of two ways. One, there is something I can do about the situation, or two, there's nothing I can do about it. Situation one, is there something I can do to fix the situation, to solve the problem, to have therefore less stress? Great. Stop wasting energy on the stressing part, go to the solution part. Try to fix the situation, try to improve the situation. Number two is there's nothing I can do about it. It's a terrible situation. And if it is a situation where there are things that you cannot control, I try to tell myself I'm going to try to limit the indulgence of being stressed, of fretting about it, of worrying about it, of, God forbid, having heart palpitations and sweats and not sleeping. Because if it truly makes no difference to the situation, I can either cope with the situation with a clear head, well rested, well fed, ready to do the best I can in the situation, or I can come in just destroyed from being stressed. So those are the two options that we have. Either we can change something or we can't. So in my previous example, there were some things that I could control in that situation. And really it came down to making some tough decisions, having some very tough conversations with people. But the sooner I get over that indulging in stress situation, as soon as I get over the panic attack spiral that I was in, I could make tough decisions, have challenging conversations, and help navigate the situation. Because ultimately, what I keep telling myself is, it just is. There are situations that happen. It's just the way things happen. And really, in a sense, and this is maybe going a little bit, maybe too deep into stoicism or something, but in a sense, not that many things matter that much. I know that, there's going to come a point in time where all of the efforts that we are putting into our life right now, we're going to be dead and gone sometime, and none of that's going to matter. None of that stuff that we're fretting about right now really matters. I mean, I can think back to times, I'm sure you can too. You can think back to times when you're in high school, or your first job, or your first few relationships that felt so bad. It was so terrible. Situations that were so terrible. And now you can look back and almost laugh at it. Like, oh man, I wish I had those kind of problems, right? I wish I had those kind of situations. But in the moment, stress is stress. You were feeling those same physiological things because it was stress. And the reality is that for most of the things that we're stressing about today, in 5 years from now, you're going to look back and think, oh man, I don't even really totally forgot about that. That wasn't a big deal. Or, you laugh about it because it's all perspective. So our perspective changes. So we choose how to interpret situations. So to summarize this mental perspective thing, I would just say that choosing to change my perspective of the situation I was in proved that I had control over some of my stress. And this brings us to point number 2. The second thing you can do, the second tool you have to control your stress is journaling, is writing things down. And I think there's a few different, some people are going to think of this and like roll their eyes. Okay, stop the podcast. Journaling is too hokey pokey. Or you're like me and I love journaling. Something I kind of came into, I don't remember how many years ago now. I have a whole bunch of journals that I write in. I go through months and months and months at a time, writing every single day. And then there are other periods of time where I do just a couple of days a week. But I can tell you that having a way to get some stressful situations kind of off my chest or my ideas off my chest, it gives me an opportunity to, one, writing it down literally. And there's research on this too, that writing things down, stressful situations down, helps reduce your stress. So don't hold all that inside, write it down, and it gives you a chance to look back on it. And I can tell you countless times, and now it's so fulfilling for me to do this. It's almost a little bit of a joy to have something that's a situation that's a little bit stressful in the moment. And as I write this down in my journal, I realize I know I'm going to look back on this and not think it's a big deal, but I write it down anyhow, because in the moment I'm feeling like, oh, I'm kind of anxious about the situation. You write it down, and sure enough, when I flip through, previous weeks and months and years ago of journal entries on things that I was stressed out about, things that I was worried about, sometimes I'll document it one day, and clearly when I look at my writing, I'm like, oh, I was coming in pretty hot that day when I was writing, and then I never write about it again. Like whatever that terrible potential situation was or awful thing that made me feel stressed out or anxious or whatever, it was gone. It wasn't a big deal. And when I read that often enough, it helps me at least, again, keep my perspective that whatever's going on right now, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And dealing with all the consequences, all the physical consequences of being stressed out, having chronic stress, is not worth it. So journaling, huge, super benefit. I can't stress that enough. It's a great way to also plan for your upcoming days, which can also decrease your stress if you go into a day with kind of a strategy on what your things are for the next day. I will give a little plug for a book here. It's called The One Thing. The One Thing. And I've read this book, and it's on, like, just as it says, as it sounds. And it was by Gary Keller. And if you can start every day knowing that there's one main thing that's going to help you move your life forward in a certain way, it helps give you focus and helps you kind of like skirt through some of the other stressful situations you realize are not that important. So that's number 2. So we've got mental perspective, we got journaling. The third thing, I'm going to say this probably in every podcast in one way or another, exercise. Exercise releases endorphins. It lifts your mood. Enough said, right? A million other benefits. Heart health, living longer, health span, blood sugar control, avoiding metabolic diseases, cognitive benefits, etc., etc. Exercise, physical exercise, decreases stress. Hard stop. It's the way it works. If you can get 30 minutes of exercise most days of the week, that's enough to help manage your stress. If you're able to do some exercise outside, like going for a jog or a hike or a bike ride outside, even better, because being outside is also another big bonus for reducing stress. So there's research on that as well. So exercise, please do it. If you're not sure how to exercise, not sure what's right exercise for you in your situation, or how to get started or how to advance, send me a message. It's what I do. Have help. So we've got mental perspective, journaling, exercise. 3 realistic, approachable tools to decrease your stress and extend your health span. Which brings us to the one thing you can do today to extend your health span. The one thing I would suggest you do today, I'm going to suggest this because I feel like most people probably don't do this, is to journal, is to take the time to write a private journal. And whether it's literally, if you're like me, like I love my literal book and my pen, my fancy pen, that is maybe an old school way of journaling, or do it on a a Word document, or make it I guess you could probably do a voice memo to yourself or something, but something you can go back to and reference, something where you can like just get stuff off your chest, just hash through certain situations, say things that you wouldn't say out loud. It's a safe place to spill your guts. And equally important, it's a great place to look back on things. I mean, we have to learn from our, you know, kind of from our mistakes, but also from our wins and our losses and decisions that we've made. And it's great to go back and look. And really, it's almost like doing repetitions in the gym, repetitions of a certain exercise, that it's, you can look back and see how much resilience you actually have. I mean, you're here, you're alive, you're listening to this podcast, you've been through some crap in your life, you've had super stressful situations, and yet here you are, and you're listening, and you're listening to this. I mean, A, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this, but B, you're doing it because you care about your own health. And so you are tough. And it's hard to remember how tough you are when there's pressures coming down on you and when there's really stressful, uncomfortable situations that are happening, some of which are completely out of our control. But to have a living document that is a piece of you that you can look back upon and say, okay, this really sucks right now, but I'm going to get through this. I can figure this out because it's kind of like situation A and B and C from last year and 3 years ago. And so for me, I can look back and again, I know exactly what I was feeling at that time in my example of my, emotional stress back in 2019. But there is nothing that's going to happen in my life right now or ever that I foresee that is going to crush me like that did, because I'm not going to let it. And I know I was resilient enough to push through that. And so it gives me perspective and it gives me more like stress management muscles in a sense. So please get a journal. Please invest in yourself. Please write your story to yourself. You're worth it. And I think you'll get a lot out of it. So I can tell you that after my 2019 challenge, after this expansion into a second location or attempted expansion into a second location, after almost losing this brand new piece of property that we had purchased for my rehab practice, it wasn't so long after that that the pandemic came. So to say that there was it was probably 7 or 8 months after my near meltdown that we had to shut down my practice because of COVID. So maybe, just maybe, at that point, I realized that I'm not gonna I'm not gonna crush under stress. I'm not gonna deal with it that way. I have to control it. And it was one of those things that was out of my control. The pandemic was out of my control. The rules that were being forced upon me in my practice at the time were out of my control. And aside from being thoughtful of the health of myself and the people I love, I had to shrug off the rest and not lose sleep over it. So it was crazy times. If you have any questions about this episode and this topic, or if you want to dive deeper into anything specific about this topic, you can message me. I will leave links in the show notes on important points that I've made during this episode, including if you want to sign up for my monthly newsletter where I go a little bit deeper into some of these health span related topics. You can also feel free to send me a message through the podcast platforms that allow direct messaging to me. So love to hear from you. I really appreciate your time and attention. Here's your health. Cheers.